Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer and this is Strange Mosaic. And we have what I hope will be a really interesting show for you guys today. As you know, especially those of you who have followed me for years, that I really enjoy talking about the experiences that I have at parties. And usually I work threads into shows that are really about other topics, or I talk about them with people who maybe have a little bit of interest in the music or used to go to parties back in the day or have some expanded knowledge on sound or energy or lighting or something related to, sort of what goes on at parties. But I very rarely, in fact, almost never on the show, get to chat with somebody who's as into it as I am and who kind of like knows what I mean, if you know what I mean. And about a month ago, I attended a party in Los Angeles, as I often do. But this was one of the most important musical experiences of my life. And so while I knew I wanted to talk about it, I waited a little while to see how I wanted to talk about it. And it felt like doing it the way I normally do wasn't going to work this time. So last week, I started digging around on the internet to see who was talking about the party, if what I could find. And I found my way to a subreddit that had a lot of commentary about the party. And it was interesting to see other people's feedback. It's not something I do that often anymore. I used to do that a long time ago. But there was somebody chatting in the subreddit that left a link to a review they had done to the party. And so I went over there and checked that out. And before I kind of tell you what I found, I just want to show you guys, just so we know what we're working from here. And I will include at some point in this a video of what the wall of sound is all about. But this is the flyer from the party that I attended, right? And you guys have seen me share some of these before. And so I went over to the website of or the Substack where there was a party review, and I read this. DVS1 Wall of Sound dominates Los Angeles. DVS1 expanded my rave Overton window. Zach Kudareski, more commonly known as DVS1, played techno of the purest and hardest variety from 3 a.m. until 7:35 a.m. on Saturday morning, January 25th, subjugating and crushing dancers between his decks of steel and his throbbing wall of sound. I've danced for 7 hours without stopping. I've danced for 10 and a quarter hours with a few water breaks. But DVS1's 4.5 hour set felt like the BDSM of dance music. I was bound, slapped, punched, kicked, and assaulted with my permission. At multiple points in the night, I almost said my safe word, but I stuck it out, and though I suffered soreness for days, I think I might want to go back for more. I think I may have found my guy. I read the rest of the article, which absolutely delighted me. And I had another first experience, which was being the first person ever to comment on somebody's brand new Substack page. So I made a request and he responded. The the owner and writer of the website Despa.co and the brand new Substack Magical Dancefloors, Vlad Coho. Welcome to Strange Mosaic. I can't wait to talk about this with you. How are you doing this morning, my friend?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thanks for that great introduction. It was awesome hearing that intro read in your voice. You did a great dramatic reading. I appreciate it.
I have a little voiceover in my background.
Ah, that explains it.
Actually, so what grabbed me, it's something I used to do. Like back in the rave days, I would go on the boards and hear what people talked about at parties. And then at a certain point for me, like I had kind of a departure and started really, I think, having what I felt like were very different thoughts and experiences at parties and about parties than the other people, right? And some of that was simultaneous to me having a departure in life in terms of things that I was interested in and sort of viewpoints or beliefs that I held about the world around me. And so I just kind of stopped doing that. I still went to parties, I still had the experiences, but I stopped really looking at what everyone else was talking about. And so this was interesting to go and to do that. And the discussion was interesting. But when I came over to your Substack page, that opening paragraph reminded me of, I think it was either the first or second article I wrote for a dance music magazine I used to write for in the early 2000s called Feedback. And I think I had been reviewing a Speedy J album. And I drew a comparison to like the noises sounding like the inmates had been let out of the asylum or something like that, right? I'm remembering more than 20 years back. And there was an energy in the way you were describing your experience that like I knew from the way that I had tried to describe some of this stuff at one time when I was writing about it. And then I really loved reading your article. We have some similar perspectives, some different perspectives. I love that you went back and forth between like a technical analysis and then an experiential, sort of your experience based kind of thing, and then sort of gave it a framework by talking about the equipment that was being used, talking about the groups that throws the party and sort of what that experience was like, like on a sort of business type level, and then gave it a scorecard, almost like you would give a restaurant, or like I told you, I was a gymnast and, kind of seeing how the judges scored you. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, I love this. Like, I can't wait for more of this. So I was excited to talk to you. And I really want to break down the party with you. I want to talk a little bit about your concept of magical dance floors and your history with the party known as Despacio. But first of all, like, I want to get to know you a little bit. Like, how did you find your way, A, to like dance music and electronic music parties and stuff, and ultimately to that warehouse in Los Angeles on January 25th?
Mm. So the short version of how I found my way here, and we can dive into any of this, is that my mom used to drag me out dancing with her. Single mom, three boys, and so sometimes, of course, moms need to dance too. So but she didn't want to go alone. Sometimes she wanted to have a good excuse to go home, and so she would drag me along to be. Just a chaperone of sorts. I wasn't supposed to look out for her. I was, probably 13, 14 when she started doing this. She just wanted to be able to point to me sitting over in the corner and say, I got to take my son home. I'm just here to dance kind of thing. So that was the start of it. And, I remember being a teen, kind of being embarrassed by her dancing and her expressiveness on the dance floor, because all teens are embarrassed by their parents. But honestly, I've inherited her DNA on the dance floor. So I definitely am expressive, and sometimes that embarrasses my girlfriend, and I like to embarrass my kids with it as well. It's just I like to let go of myself on the dance floor. So in college, went to a lot of house parties and dance parties. Not really raves, but good 2, 3 hour, 4 hour parties, late at night, and just had a roommate who was a DJ. And he introduced me to a lot of better dance music. I think
Mhm.
prior to that, I had worked in a record store in high school, so
Mm.
I had some understanding of music. And the older guys who worked in the store, really tried to fill me with their taste. Like
Uh-huh.
saying, "Oh, you got to listen to this, and you got to listen to that." And they actually did a good job of, making sure that I found my way to some really good stuff. I think Portishead was one of the, kind of key influential artists that I discovered as a result of that experience. So, kind of fast forward, skip ahead 20 years, I guess. So I got married, had kids, and, didn't go out a lot. But then, back in 2016, a friend dragged me to Coachella,
Mm.
and I had a really great experience. One of those experiences, I mean, obviously all the music was wonderful, but one of the experiences was I wandered into Despacio. Despacio is a project from Too Many DJs, also known as Soulwax and James Murphy, the frontman for LCD Sound System. Those three DJs sit in a booth that's kind of tucked off to the side of the dance floor and hidden on purpose. And they DJ a vinyl only set for 6 or 7 hours. So in 2016, I wandered into this tent and I looked around the room and I'm like, what is this? It was unlike anything else at Coachella. I saw these towering speaker stacks that had little blue screens in them. And I'm like, oh, those are TVs and speaker stacks. This must be some sort of art exhibit. I didn't really understand what I was seeing.
Hmm.
I probably bounced out of that room after 15 minutes. I really didn't get it. It went over my head, but there was something about it. There was a seed planted there. And so when Despacio returned after the pandemic in 2022 to This Ain't No Picnic in Pasadena, I decided to go from beginning to end. I really don't know how I made that decision. I still didn't know a lot about Despacio, but there was just something that called me to it. So I went and I danced for 6 hours without a break, and it was amazing. I really, really had a transformation there on the dance floor. I've
Hmm.
written a lot about that. We can return to that point later. And that was the beginning of my love affair with trying to find really great dance floors because Despacio showed me what a great dance floor could be.
Okay, interesting. So for you, it wasn't so much of like this passion for electronic music or some specific genre of it. You didn't come up in raves. It was more like you wandered into a situation that you liked, and it was like, how can I find more of these situations?
Yeah,
I
that's
love.
right.
Okay, so it's a very different entry story from me, but I will say that one of the most transformative experiences for me also came at Coachella, even though in general I do not care for or prefer festivals or large format
Yeah.
events. But 10 years prior to you, in 2006, I was in a real strange spot in life, right? Like I was struggling with myself just in general, also with some issues around substances, but also my stepbrother had died the previous fall tragically, unexpectedly, and I was like, I think in a level of shock that I didn't even recognize then, but like in hindsight, like I get, right? And at this point, I had been going to parties for 6 or 7 years, right? I started in the late 90s in Los Angeles, but it really became part of my identity when I moved to Austin in 1999. And there was a sort of a rave scene here that was a more manageable size than what was going on in LA. And so, like, it became a culture that I was really more of a part of instead of just attending events. Um, and my experience has shifted and transformed over the years, but the thing that happened to me during this period of time with a huge part of it being at that Coachella that year was they had like a really good dance tent that year, right? With the kind style of music that I like, which is much more sort of techno focused, or I like house music, but it's a more aggressive house music, right? So that year they had Carl Cox and Joey Beltram and Derek Carter, but also in that tent they had Daft Punk and Madonna. Like it was a really interesting combination of like sort of a little bit more underground, somewhat commercial dance music, and then very commercial music. But the way it all kind of went down, it really gelled and worked. And also, Lucent Dossier Experience was performing all sort of weekend in that tent. And the way they were performing was like not on stage, they were working their way through the audience, right?
Oh.
So I ate some mushrooms and it was very hot that day. And like at a certain point, I was like, I think maybe ate too many. Like, I think I'm gonna die. Right. And I just had to become okay with that. And at a certain point, I didn't die, but I started having like a different experience than I had had with substances or with the music before. And maybe this was like the desert of it, right? Um, and like I felt strongly like I kept feeling like my brother was standing behind me. We used to go to parties together. In fact, we had been to Nocturnal Wonderland at the same Empire Polo Field in the 90s, right, together and had an interesting experience that becomes part of the story. But I kept feeling like I wanted to turn around and talk to him, but he felt like he was behind me, but obviously he wasn't there. And it was almost like the tracks, particularly in the space of time where like it was moving from Joey Beltram to Derek Carter, and then when it was moving from Derek Carter to Carl Cox, like the tracks that were sort of in between felt like they were pointed at or talking to me sort of through him. And there were several of them, but at one point Carl Cox played like a bit of the Police Message in a Bottle, right? And when I had been there with my brother, like, at Coachella, at sort of Nocturnal Wonderland many years before, he had asked me to carry a vial of acid in, like in my underwear, and it broke, and I had been tripping balls, right? So I had like this little bottle of acid, right? And Carl Cox played this Message in the Bottle track, and it reminded me of that experience, right? And it felt like I was connected back to that time, and it was really just a holistically interesting feeling. But I was taking pictures just of the room throughout the set. Like I was holding my camera phone at that point, like a flip phone. I think it was like the Motorola Razr because of the time period we were in, and just taking pictures. I'm pretty short, so like it's hard for me to sort of see certain things. And when the Carl Cox set was over, I went outside to get some air, and I looked at the pictures that I had taken. And there was one picture that I had that had like the stilt walker with the umbrella from Lucent Dossier Experience standing behind me in this really weird way that made the picture look like my brother's face was superimposed on it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And when I got home, I looked, in like the last picture that was ever taken of him, right? Looked exactly like the imprint that was on the picture of the Lucent Dossier guy standing behind me. And so it was like, oh, like he was there in some way, right? And that I can really use these experiences to connect with something sort of beyond our regular understanding of space and time. And it's having been like pretty much an atheist till that point in my life. From that moment, I no longer was. I was at least agnostic and suddenly very interested in things of a much more metaphysical nature, right? And that happened for me at Coachella. So there's something about that environment that is, religious people go make the pilgrimage to Mecca and this kind of thing. And I think like this for people who are living in modern times and into music or whatever it is, it's kind of like a version of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. Uh, you know, I, I had a similar experience of, dancing with my mother, who's now
Hmm.
dead. Uh, but I felt like her spirit was there dancing with me. So yeah, I think I know some of what you're talking about. It really is. I mean, that's what happens on dance floors. There are these,
Yep.
kind of between spaces or Bardo spaces where I think spirits come out.
100%, right? Like
Yeah.
the amount, I mean, for me, the amount of unusual experiences I've had, and to be clear, I had unusual experiences before that, but to me, they were more psychological or
Mm,
like more sort of scientific in nature, right?
mm,
And I felt like I could understand what was happening that made me think that it felt like this, that, or the other thing. And this was something that was like, I don't know what the explanation for this is, and I'm okay with that, but it has me interested and I want to explore. And I now for me, the parties have become a portal, right? Parties are a
hmm
portal. And it used to be just a portal into sort of like the inner psychological space and it's sort of a self-analysis. And then kind of post that experience, while I still do some of that, it's much more a portal to other understandings of time and dimension and other ways of looking at myself and other people and understanding like things down to like the sort of cellular level and things as massive as whatever they say space is or whatnot, right? And so it really started an education process for me that became like I can't wait to go to the party to learn more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
it sounds like your headspace during these parties is pretty similar to what I go through. I just experienced so many different like you said, from the cellular level to the universal level, my mind is going all over the place, and it's such an eye-opening exploration and journey. It's really what draws me back to them repeatedly.
And I love that you can be the person next to you can be having a completely different experience,
Yeah.
right? That is either A, completely in the physical world, like they're just at the party having fun, eating drugs and enjoying dancing or being with their friends or whatever it is, or they're having, like it means something to them more, but it isn't like super esoteric, right?
Right.
Or they're having an equally esoteric but completely different experience of whatever this is. And it takes us back to like what we're dealing with at the underlying level here is frequency, sound,
Mm.
right? Sound, basically sound, and then light. And this has been the cause of everything since the beginning of time, right? And this is just the highly potent, concentrated sort of pushing everything else out of it experience. And there's as many stories can be told about how someone experiences it as there are people there, right? It's
Yeah.
really fascinating when you have almost an exact similar experience to someone else who's there, but you're not talking about it while you have it, and then you go report it to each other and it's similar, and it almost makes you wonder, right? Like if, we live in a, far more unusual place than they would like us to know about, right?
Yeah. No, quantum entanglement of like mind
Yeah.
states, or I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it certainly happens. And, I think that kind of commonality of experience is, um, yeah, it's remarkably like the coincidences are just too much to, chalk up to mere coincidence. It's really boggles the mind sometimes.
There's a really good book that I read actually very early on in the pandemic as part of a series that I was doing with a friend during that time. And the book is called Synchronicity and it's by someone named F. David Pete. And it compiles a lot of uh, works from interesting scientists and thinkers and whatever. But ultimately, it's sort of like, I guess, kind of philosophical type of book that includes like science, physics and genetics and different things in it. And it really it really helped me to understand, because I had been noticing so many of these things for so long, how synchronicity is part of the underlying nature of the universe. It's part of how reality like enfolds and then unfolds itself and back again. And I guess you're kind of left with the question like of chicken and egg, right? Like, does something happen because I'm thinking about it, or am I thinking about it because there's something out there that's about to happen, and I'm picking up on that vibe, right?
Mm,
And so it really helped me to start to like be able to classify some of these experiences in a different way than I did before, right? And sort of set up like, I wouldn't say necessarily like experiments, but start to track, right? Like, where did this sort of episode actually begin? Where did it end? And am I sort of the generator of it, the observer of it? It's possible to be both, but it isn't always that at the same time, right? So yeah, it's if you tend to have these kinds of experiences on the dance floor, you might find the book, right?
yeah.
Kind of
I'll check
interesting. Yeah.
I'll check it out for sure. I made a note. Yeah, I'm a reader for sure. A lot of what I've been reading lately is, about dance floors, and so this one sounds like it'll be really helpful. I know it's not maybe specifically about them, but it seems like it could offer me, kind of a framework or analysis structure.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's not bury the lead. Let's get into talking about the DVS1 Wall of Sound, and then later I would like to hear quite a bit about Despacio, because I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of it until I read your blog. And at first I wasn't sure if Despacio was a club or a party or a DJ or whatever. And obviously I've heard of the people that are involved in Despacio, but I've never heard of Despacio. And so I would like to get into that a little bit, but
Yeah.
let's talk about exactly how you ended up, because it doesn't seem to me that like techno is your main driver in
Yeah.
terms of like your interest in parties and dancing. So like, what brought you to that event?
Yeah. Yeah. So DVS1, what brought me to the event was DVS1, I think is a thought leader, and he puts out video and statements. And it was actually one of his videos where he was explaining um, the concept of the wall of sound and explaining some of his approach to building a dance floor, where I said, "Oh wow, this guy really gets it. He actually is on the same wavelength as Too Many DJs and James Murphy when they designed Despacio." So that's the way I came to it. I'm like, I was looking for other artists who understood
Mm,
um, what they wanted to build and had a clarity of vision for what they were building, rather than being part of the mainstream commercial EDM music machine, which I think is completely broken. It's designed to sell, millions of tickets to people who are essentially just at a standing concert, right? DVS1, specifically believes that the DJ should be hidden, so that dancers can focus on each other. And that happened at Wall of Sound, of course. He's tucked off into the corner. And I actually didn't even lay eyes on him until, I think the final hour of the experience.
Not for me. I didn't even know he was in the corner there till the last 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. As the crowd kind of thinned out, then people kind of gravitated towards that corner. But it wasn't until that started happening that I even knew where he was in the room. So his clarity of vision around DJ placement, around lighting. So the lighting was 360. And again, Despacio is a 360 experience. The speakers are actually arranged in a large circle, 7 stacks. The emphasis on the sound system itself is also really key to the way he approaches these events. So with the Wall of Sound, it's meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be, obviously it's a reference to the Grateful Dead Wall of Sound that really kind of blew people's minds long ago.
I'll include right here, I will cut in that 4-minute video of him explaining. Right.
Perfect.
Because I also have heard him talk about that many times, but I've seen that video many times as well. So I'll put that in here so people can get some idea of what we're talking about. Okay, I'm including the clip here. Hopefully I won't get a strike. So fair use, and thank you to DVS1 and Rotterdam Rave for the clip. Here we go.
The sound system should be as big as any of the DJs on the flyer. It should be, in its own right, it should be a headliner. It should be, and if you can promote it to that level and then deliver it to that level, it becomes important, and it becomes an aesthetic that people have to care about. We tried actually to contact Tom Danley, who designs the speakers, but he's church-going guy from Texas who doesn't fly. But Danley is like the legendary sound guy. Like, you go on all these forums, people like, when you mention Tom Danley, they're all like, oh yeah, man, his bass is the greatest thing ever. Well, he never pushed himself in dance music. Like, he just did sound, and he was legendary about it. It's cool. I can only imagine what it's like to stand here, you know? Hey, can we try some other music? That's so funny to watch everyone on the water. Check it out with the track, hold on. I like the water. You turn the system up, it almost becomes like a tunnel. Like, you know when you blow into a fan and that's almost what happens with the bass as it starts to get louder and pushes it further into the room. It's like you can almost find this line where you cross it and you're like, whoa, oh shit, there it is. I want somebody to come here and understand why this was better or different than the other experience they have next weekend or the weekend before. I want them to demand in their future something better for themselves because of maybe this experience. Like, wow, this was, I totally heard music differently. So this is what I'm chasing now.
All right, so there's a little taste of what the Wall of Sound is all about, and I will include the link to that clip as well as to a DJ set and an interview with DVS1 in the description below. Now back to the show. Hope you're enjoying. That is not the specific Wall of Sound that we saw, right? But it's an earlier iteration of it, and he's explaining the concept. So continue.
Yeah. So it was all of that kind of advocacy on his part that really turned me on. And I decided that I had to go to Wall of Sound when it was announced for Los Angeles. Actually, a bunch of friends pinged me a link to it. I don't typically seek out techno shows, like you said. I'm more on the Balearic side, eclectic, anything that's danceable, really, I'll dance to. So I'm not averse to techno by any means, but I tend to just have in kind of an openness and wide-ranging set of music that I'll dance to. So at any rate, friends forwarded it to me. I knew I had to go. I was already in the midst of a book project to describe magical dance floors. So I'm like, this could be one. I really have to evaluate it. I read back on prior threads of Wall of Sound at Movement Detroit afters from last year, and the reviews were really fantastic and convinced me that it was not like other dance floors in a lot of significant ways. People really struggled in those comments on Reddit to describe it, though. So that's one thing that I feel like I can add to the picture is a description that is, I mean, because you're not going to be able to take video at the event, for obvious reasons. He bans phones from the event. So I needed to try to help people understand what this is and why it's special. I don't think I always succeed at that, but I feel like this is the only review that is at length on this specific concept. And so I feel like I did it justice. And in fact, the organizers forwarded him the URL, the link, and he said it was an accurate and fair review. So I'm glad that he read it and, found it to be, accurate and fair.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. This article you wrote is the most compelling thing about dance music that I have read in a really long time. The only other thing that I would say is equal, but it's totally different, was the article interview of Jeff Mills in DJ Magazine last year.
I got to check that one out. I'm going to write a note.
Excellent. I mean, right. But I kind of like this reminded me why I liked reading about dance music, where at a certain point it had become unsatisfactory to me. Like what people were talking about was not what I cared about. But kind of just to touch on some of the things you said, I think DVS1 might be the most important person in dance music right now because of the way he's talking about things and the things that he's talking about and the risks he's willing to take. And actually in some ways, though for a longer period of time, you could say the same thing about Jeff Mills. When you go read that article, I'd be interested to know your feedback about it. The way Jeff Mills is talking about where the world is going and how he sees techno music and his music playing a role in that, like speaks to so much of how I see electronic music in general, but like more specifically techno, which is a different thing than what most people think it is. Like people who don't know anything about electronic music think that all electronic music can interchangeably be called techno. And even people who like some of the modern techno, the thing that they like, I might not really consider that techno, right? The very hard groove type of thing, that there's like this sort of vast expanse, yet it is a very specific thing simultaneously, right? And so, but DVS1, because of his willingness, though he has a huge personality and character, to know his role when he's DJing and to make himself on some level small, right? So that the experience can be big. And then outside of the party, like try to do things to correct some of the broken parts of our system and be willing to put his money where his mouth is, to publicly fail, right? And to keep going and try something else or take a rest and do it again, and to really stay connected to the sort of underground place he came from, makes him, not in any kind of hierarchical sense, super important to where we're at in the world right now. I think a lot of people, like there's a lot of industries that need a DVS1 to make sure that the ship doesn't get steered way off course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he's a rebel. It's true to his roots, like you said. Growing up in Minneapolis, he, through renegade raids, and I think he got arrested at one point, or maybe even several points. He's never content being part of a mainstream. So I think what he's doing now with his platform and his profile is really great. It's really excellent advocacy, and it's showing people that there is a better way, and that these events can be more thoughtful and more impactful.
Yeah, and he doesn't what the maturity he's developed where like he can say what he thinks without making other people wrong or bad, right?
Yeah,
Like you think he really is thoughtful in the way he talks about these things. So this
yeah,
was your first time seeing DVS1.
yeah. That's right.
So I've seen him a number of times dating back probably to like 2009 or 10 time, but this was the first time I've seen him on like his wall of sound, like right.
Hmm.
I've seen him twice in clubs, one like very small club, right, like on a weeknight kind of event. That was the first time I saw him. I've seen him uh at another work event a couple of years ago where it wasn't on a wall of sound, but it was on like Danley. It was a Danley sound system that
Yeah,
was not set up like the wall of sound. It was kind of more of an interesting sort of hexagonal configuration around the dance floor, which made it a completely different experience, both in terms of how it sounded, but also in terms of the effects created in the room, also with minimal lighting. That event, it was really weird. Like I had this moment where like I had a really unique insight about something that was happening at the event, like sort of more metaphysically. And the moment I said that out loud to my friend, the music shut off, the lights went on, and the police were there. It was the fucking weirdest thing. It was almost like, oh, you're
wow,
not allowed to notice that, right?
wow,
Kind of thing. And
wow.
so the party got shut down when it was like really in full swing. But the hour or so, an hour and a half that I got of it was like, I mean, I would, of course, I want more, but like, I'm not mad that I went, sort of for that. And then I also saw him at a club here in Austin that was like a good long set. He was playing with Justin Long from Chicago, who's a friend of his, but it was really hearing him on a sound system that is not what he deserves. It was not
Mm,
up to par for like, it wasn't a terrible sound system, but it's just, it wasn't, yeah, right. It didn't do
yeah,
it justice, in my opinion. And then this experience here at the Wall of Sound, which, based on my other times having seen him, like I went in there with him already having earned my trust that I will
mm,
kind of go wherever this experience sort of leads me. I didn't have to, he didn't have to sort of break me in that way, even though it was a very dynamic experience for myself as well. So I love that you appreciate like it, that it was DVS1 that brought you there more than like any sort of expectation around like what kind of music or whatever it is, right?
right. Yeah,
As I've gotten older, like in the beginning, I would go to all the parties, right? I would like I would go to I would go to the club on Thursday night, party on Friday night, Saturday night, after hours on Sunday, sometimes into Monday, right? And then, eventually I kind of got narrowed into like two main streams, right? Which were pretty techno. I was living mostly in Los Angeles during this. Los Angeles has been sort of most formative in terms of like my aesthetic musically. Whereas I'd say Austin a little bit more, especially early, was like more of like my dancing aesthetic and sort of how I comport myself in the dance environment, right? But I was kind of going to two sort of streams of music. I started going to the droid behavior parties. I don't know if you ever heard of those, which were started in Los Angeles in the early 2000s, and were really responsible for Los Angeles being the techno hotbed that it is today. And droid behavior are not together anymore, but sort of the offshoot of that is Observe, which is a party that happens like usually twice a year in Los Angeles and once a year in Detroit and sometimes a few other places. And then I was going to this other party that actually like seems like it might have been like kind of up your alley, that was called Absurd. And it was a recurring event that was thrown by a couple who were, one of the guys also worked at what's the big record store in I can't think of it right now, the one that's from San Francisco, it's in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, I'm blanking on it as well, but I've been
You know what
there.
I'm talking about? Like
Yep.
he ran the dance music section there, right? So he was always an excellent sort of curator. His name's Oliver.
Mm.
Right. So they started doing these parties that were kind of having like as Evil Eddie Richards, Terry Francis, and Nathan Coles as kind of the regulars or the residents, specifically Evil Eddie Richards, who it's very like acidy style tech house, the three of them.
Yep.
And then later they started bringing in sort of other people, but always usually, but in the beginning it was the three of them, and then it became more Eddie with like a variety of people. And that party went on for a number of years, and that 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 created a space in my mind for like where things started to go for me on the internal level. And then like musically, I was always very into to techno, and droid behavior was really at the forefront of the place where technology and music meet, and always had really interesting visual shows and lots of interesting live PAs, and focused heavily on the quality of the sound and whatnot. And so I was kind of developing through these two paths simultaneously, and there was some crossover between people who attended the events. But as I've gotten, older and moved around and done different things, I've gotten to the place where like I also can appreciate some things that are not that, if they do it well, right? And for me, the doing it well is like either experiential or the quality of the sound, for sure, is like, now that's my main thing, is the quality of this. I'd rather see like a local DJ on a good sound system than a headliner on a ghetto blaster, right? Or someone who's able to create such an artistic environment, right? Like something like a Mayan Warrior sound system, where that isn't usually the music I would choose, but the entirety of the experience is like, a dream or something like that.
Right.
So I can appreciate something like that. And there's all kinds of things sort of in between. But it's interesting that to you, it's been more about the situation. Like I want to find myself in a specific kind of situation, as opposed to this is the music I like. Right.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'm not genre driven. It's
Mhm.
ultimately about, like you said at the beginning, a portal. And so I think certain dance floors really open a portal, and others, I think the portals might be smaller and harder to get to. I mean, they can still happen. You can open a portal on your kitchen floor, with a tinny speaker, with the right crowd and the right environment. So I think magical dance floors can happen anywhere, but the magic is more likely to happen when all of these elements come together.
Great.
And so that's what because life is short, only have so many weekends to go out,
Use a
have
man
other
magic.
responsibilities.
I love it. Use a man
Yeah,
magic. Yes. Well, that is totally true, right? As we
yeah,
get older and we have more responsibilities,
yeah.
there's kind of like more, I don't want to say more writing on it, but we have to pick and choose our spots.
That's
And
right.
so more thoughtfulness. It's not just we're going to every party and for every 10 there'll be one magical one. So that's fine. Now we have to make sure that there's
That's
a
right.
likelihood that we pick the magical ones.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right. So back to DVS1. So since this was definitely the most techno intensive experience you've ever had, in addition to him just being one of the most intense people in the world. So anything he's going to do is going to be that. Like, take me through the experience for you.
Yeah. So, I knew going in that it would be hard techno. I was fairly certain that I'd be able to survive it. I brought my girlfriend along. Definitely not her jam. But she's, game to go on these adventures with me. So I think the first thing that I noticed was that there's no songs here. It was just like, and every other music experience I've gone to, even folks who do really long mixes like John Digweed, you can at least tell when there's a movement from one song to another. And Digweed spends a fair amount of time in techno. So I went to 11-hour set that he did at Stereo Montreal on New Year's Eve, which is his birthday, actually New Year's Day, his birthday. And there were probably 3 or 4 hours where it was similar. You couldn't really tell when one song started and another song ended. Um, but at least at DVS1, there was like nothing to hold on to. Um, and so I immediately felt unsettled and unmoored and, was just kind of looking for a handhold. And what I kind of talk about in the write-up is that ultimately I had to let go in order to actually be there, instead of looking for anchor points like song starts and song ends, instead of looking for traditional phrasing of 32 beats or 64 beats that you would normally find in, say, house music that's really easy to mix. I instead had to find other ways to kind of survive in this storm-tossed ocean, right? Because I was just like, I felt like I had been dropped off a ship into a choppy sea, and it was extremely disorienting and in a really good way. I think one of the great things about certain medicines is that they can cause ego death, right? And there was a form of dance floor ego death. I no longer felt competent as a dancer. I felt like uh, I wasn't sure how to dance to this. Normally you can dance to a phrase, 32 or 64 beats, and you can feel like, okay, the change up is coming. I can, it's telegraphed, and when the change up happens, I'm going to let go of this part of the move and move into something else. Like none of those tactics really kind of made sense for my body to try to this music. So I talk about the way in which his specific Allen and Heath mixer with four channels, he uses it and brings certain frequencies in and out in a really unpredictable way, so that all you can really do, or at least what I felt, was that I just had to listen. And I had to be here in this moment. I could really not predict forward, 16 beats. I had to just react in real time. And that was very demanding. If you want to, or the way I tend to want to dance is to be really tied to the music. I don't like to go onto autopilot. And so it was just cognitively really taxing in a really great way. It actually pulled me really closer to the present moment, rather than focus on, well, this song I don't like and I'll wait for the next song. Like none of that kind of,
There's no songs.
yeah, there's no songs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, it was kind of, so I also concur that there was something sort of disorienting about the experience. Now, I'm very familiar with his music
Mm,
and his style and sort of that style of techno in general, right? But a couple of things were going on for me. I had been to the same venue back in November when I was home during Thanksgiving for Observe, which is
mm.
another experience. Like I highly recommend that you attend Observe because it is always like the finest meeting of sound and visual and technology and
Wow.
music. Right. It's like an orgy for, where technology meets dance music, right? Like when I
Yes, please.
saw
I want
this
to go.
yeah, like the visual show, like I was a person who for the first 20 years of my dance music reality was not that interested in visuals. Like I recognize like I was more interested in closing my eyes and watching the show on the back of my eyes, but at some point, maybe about 10 years ago, they started to look more like what I was seeing on the back of my eyes. And then now I literally see things that I'm like, in my more egotistical state, they stole that from the back of my eyes. And in my more, sort of generous and probably honest state, no, they're replicating something I've seen because that is a real place and they saw it too. And I talk about it, but they have the skills to replicate it. And so they're treating everybody that hasn't figured the portal to that realm out yet to a peep show, right? Kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
But this visual show at this last one was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I think that they described, there was two things going on. There was the screens up front and the slatted screens on the side. But then there was also like the lighting tracks in the room where they were doing what they literally referred to as a hyperdimensional light bend. And there were times when the room felt this small and times where it felt like a football field. And there was times when like I was dancing in the middle of the room and it felt like the far wall was right next to me and I was going to crash into it, but that it was a mirror and I could see through it. And then other times where it was like, wow, the wall's really far away. And then the screen was with as these visual shows have progressed, I find it interesting that they're using as the content for visual entertainment some of the topics that I look into in my shows having to do with 0 point energy, genetic engineering, space-time folding, dimensional travel, or whatever. And so it always seems to meet me in a space that my head wants to go because that's what I'm interested in anyway. And, the visuals tend to match things that I've kind of envisioned. So that was happening in addition to like a level of musical intensity that was different than DVS1, but not less. The headliners were Luke Slater and Rodhead, and it was like it was really amazing, but in a totally different way than this. So I had been to the location, and this was a completely different experience of the same space, but with some of the same challenges. I would say that the same thing that was going on here where like track set, the opening DJ did not sound as good as DVS1's was happening at Observe. I felt like the sound got significantly better when Luke Slater came on, right? Like
Interesting.
something shifted, and there's two things or more that could be happening simultaneously, right? The people doing sound are figuring out what's going on, and then also obviously headlining DJs have played on more sound systems and more situations and they know how to adjust and adapt, right? But I've had that same experience at enough parties now that like I just understand that as the night goes on, the sound will likely get better. So that was happening here as well. But I recognized one of the things I've been doing for a long time, but definitely now lately, because the sound systems at the parties that I go to are getting so good and so big, I will adapt myself to the sound before I decide if I'm going to take anything. Right. And so like I will understand like what my body feels like, what my legs feel like being exposed to this so that I can like understand what's happening if I feel different than that. Right. And so I did that. Like I got there sort of towards maybe I was there for like the last hour of Trax's set, and then into the beginning of DVS1 set. But even within that, so for me, like this is gonna sound funny. The experience was like very peaceful for me. It was very internal, which is different than what I've been experiencing lately at parties. Lately at parties, I've been sort of very interested in observing all the things going on around me and appreciating the music and the sound and dancing. But this almost felt like going to like a meditation or church or something where the point was to reflect on what was going on inside of me and then to notice all of the different ways that the sound, both the quality of the sound and then just the noises he was playing was making me feel, and to like have to challenge myself to adapt quickly over and over and over again. But it was almost like each sound or each sort of little bit of phrasing, which sometimes only lasted a few seconds and sometimes a few minutes, like shined a light on a different part of something I was looking at internally and allowed me to reflect on it. And then when that part was done, it like shook it off and threw it away and on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
And by the end of the night, it was almost like every bit of water and cellular junk in my body, not junk, but cellular matter in my body had been vibrated to the place that like all of my hopes, fears, traumas, joys, wishes had been gotten taken a look at. And I'd had a chance to sort of think about it, work through it, and like everything had come back together with all the same pieces, but in a different order or a different format that felt right. And
Yeah.
this was the first time in a long time that I went to a party by myself. I used to go all the time by myself, right? But lately, like because my girlfriend likes the music, sometimes she goes with me, or when I'm home in Los Angeles, I'm wanting to see a few friends that I have from the party scene still there, so I'll go with them, and it'll be a little bit more social. I didn't talk to a single person from the time that I got there till I left, other than when I would buy water and I spoke to someone in the line at the bathroom. So it was completely internal, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like I didn't know that I needed that. I was a little like when my friend I mean, I was supposed to go with my friend. She canceled at the last minute because her dog was sick. And like I was a little like as you get older, you feel like not as willing to take certain risks. So sometimes I feel like a little more nervous. I used to go into like the craziest places by myself, right? Now I'm like, okay, I'm going to party by myself. I haven't done this in a while. We'll see how this goes. But it felt very empowering that like, oh, I can still do that. I'm totally fine by myself. I don't need to talk to anybody. I still enjoy talking to people or whatever. But it was a really like self-reflective experience, but it was the same thing. It was the response to the same thing that you're talking about that was creating that. I also, I think, knew that it was going to be as much of a workout or like a physical. Dancing is always a workout, but it's like different than like getting worked, right? I knew I was going to get worked, so I was ready. You know what I mean? I had hydrated properly and prepared for all of this kind of stuff. One of the things that was really interesting to me was like the sound system I wouldn't even say it's the loud. I didn't find, I was right up at the front, like 5 or 6 feet from the speakers. I didn't have earplugs in. I felt like it was comfortable. But what was interesting was the conditions that were being created by the sound system. Like I felt weather coming from the speakers. Did you feel that too?
Oh yeah. It it moved air around the room in a bunch of
Yeah.
different ways, right? It wasn't just one way, just a push of air or beats. Yeah, there were like microclimates as well because of
Yeah.
the
Yes.
configuration of the room.
Yes.
You could stand in one part of the room and have a completely different experience than for the same kind of sound bath. You move to another part of the room and you're getting different frequencies and you're getting resonance from the sides. Yeah, it was really quite a jungle, very diverse in terms of where you stood and what you experienced.
Sometimes it felt like heat was coming from the speakers.
Hmm.
Sometimes it felt like a cool breeze. Sometimes it
Hmm.
felt like humidity, right? Sometimes it felt like dry and gusty, right? It was literally like climates, like you said. When I saw DVS1 at the party that got shut down, and it was a Danley system that had been set up like almost in like a hexagonal or like octagonal kind of thing. It was doing something similar, but not with climate or condition, right? It was like there was stacks all around the room, and it was almost like depending on where you were in the room, you were hearing slightly different parts of the music more accessibly. So there was like one side of the room that felt like more techno-y and one side of the room that felt like a little bit more housey. And I remember being in this one area where it had like this like tribal feel, and another area where it was like almost like I don't want to say disco because it didn't sound like disco music, but the vibe that it created felt like the vibe you think of with disco music, and you could see the people that were like gathering in the different parts of the dance room. Like you had your goth looking people over here, right? Your people who look like they kind of like house or hip hop or whatever, more over here. You had your people who are more into like dancing over here, bobbing over here. And it was like the different stacks were highlighting different parts of the music. But this
Mm.
was kind of like that with that sort of the weather or the microclimate, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was really something else. I've never been to anything like that. I've been to thousands of parties, ranging from club events to massive festivals, but mostly lots of warehouse parties. And this was uniquely a different experience that reminded me more of my early days at parties, right? Where it was more self-reflective or
Mm.
psychological, but in that environment with a level of technology that normally creates those extended out external experiences. So it was kind of different. I did sometimes feel like when a new sound would come, like I was being knocked off my feet a little bit, and it would take me a second to adjust. And then also when I would close my eyes, like I tend to like to do, and like watch the visuals behind, I noticed something I've never noticed before in that, like when I would move my head, right? It was almost like it was the opposite of what normally happens. Like normally the visuals stay sort of consistent and static or whatever. They don't move with me. But this time they were like moving with me in a way that I had never noticed before, almost like as if in a gaming sort of
Yeah.
headset or something, which was kind of interesting, considering there was like really less visual stuff going on than a lot of parties. I thought the lighting was one of the most intelligent light shows I'd ever seen.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Strobert, the Amsterdam lighting guy, works a lot with DVS1. And he was actually brought into the project by DVS1 when the team that made this event happen booked him. He's like, I gotta have this lighting guy. So I think lighting ended up being 40% of the budget for the event. So really significant. And but also super minimalistic, and he's got the nickname Strobert because of the way he, strobes
Yes,
lights,
so good.
very, very intense and awesome. Yeah.
Normally the idea of strobe lights doesn't appeal to me. Like, right? Like I'm just like, ooh, sometimes they can be annoying. But this
Yep.
was like, nope, I'm just gonna like strike your optic nerve enough to generate all the stuff that will fill in the space. It's like I'm gonna
That's
give you
right.
the scaffolding and your imagination and your, sort of synapses will fill in the rest. And it felt really important. Pay attention to this. Pay attention to this, but not telling you what this is, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was awesome. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
I really love that. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think also made the room, kind of feel special is the light was uh, and also one thing you've probably had this experience of a lighting guy who's on autopilot and just kind of triggering effects that don't really tie to the music. If we struggled as dancers to dance to basically phrases that were not, predictable, uh, I I can't imagine how a lighting director is going to be able to really hang. He's dancing essentially with the lights, uh,
Hmm.
and his ability to dial them in and uh, keep them with the music w- was really special. And he continued to bring out new effects and new arrangements
Totally.
throughout the night. Even down to the last 30 minutes, there were new things
Some
happening.
of the most interesting stuff was in that last sort of hour or so of the party. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I have deep respect for him now. He's now on my list to try to, whoever
Follow
plays with
him.
this lighting.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the guy who does the visuals for Observe. His name is Octiform. Totally different
Mm,
style than Strobert, but because I've been observing him for so many years, first at Droid parties and then at Observe parties, it's been really interesting to watch him morph and change. And what I love is sometimes I'm not sure like which is preceding which. Right? It almost feels sometimes like that what's going on with the visuals is like inspiring the sound, and other times the sound inspiring the visuals. And to me, I love that when I don't know like which came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
yeah,
It felt like
yeah.
that with Strobert. It was almost like they were playing tennis, like or ping
Oh,
pong.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, you're right. I think there was more collaboration going on there.
yeah.
I mean, how can DVS1 not see the lights and react to them and say, "Oh, I like what's going on with this vibe, and I'm gonna
This
lean
makes
into
me
it."
think
Yeah,
that. This makes me
that's
feel
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So the sound system was different than I know that at times his wall of sound has been a Danley. This was L'acoustic. I don't know if he's
That's
done
right.
one before or if this was his first experiment with it and what, or whatever. I'm not 100% certain on the history of why this one now. Usually like most of the parties I go to, are Function One or Danley or some sort of custom thing that includes a little of this and a little of that. Was this your first experience on acoustic as well?
I don't know if it was my first on acoustics, but I think they're prevalent enough that I must have experienced them elsewhere. I'm just not sure where.
Me too. As part of a
Yeah,
custom stack, I think I
that's
probably
right.
have. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and part of what happened with the sound as well, you mentioned that tracks didn't sound great, and a lot of other people you mentioned that as well. And I asked the organizers about it. So the mixer that they sound checked on with tracks uh, passed the sound check. Everything was great, but then something happened to that mixer. They had to swap in a Pioneer A9 at the last minute for tracks to play on, and
Mhm.
at the way tracks plays, he really pushes. Um, the trim levels way up, and so it just
Mhm.
did not sound great on the
Yeah.
system. So when DVS1 came on, they swapped in the Allen and Heath mixer that he prefers anyway, and everything kind of really settled in and
Yep.
sounded pretty great. So yeah, I think they had definitely some challenges early on, but I'm glad that it was figured out for DVS1. And even though, you know, the sound challenges seem to have been worked out for DVS1, there were still moments where the audience or, dancers got pretty unsettled. I think I mentioned, people puking in trash cans.
Yeah.
There were, I loved it.
Me too.
I never
Yeah.
feel nauseous from that stuff. That's what I really crave. I love to stick my head in a speaker. I love to really feel all of my parts vibrated. So it wasn't unsettling for me, but there were moments where just I think the stack of low frequencies just hit people in that whatever nerve it is that gets tickled that causes nausea, right?
I think it's so for me, those are probably some of the same moments where I felt, whoa, I have to recalibrate my balance, or oh, I'm switching from thinking, reflecting on this instance in life, or this whatever it is, or this late train of thought to the other one. And sometimes that switch, it's kind of like making a fast hairpin turn for some people. Like that was how they responded to it. But I like that. I like having every cell in my body sort of wrung out and
That's right.
vibrated, but also like I'm an athlete, so I like to have my
Mm.
body worked. Like I want every
Mm.
muscle, every, tendon, every ligament or whatever to get the full treatment.
Yeah, that reminds me, I didn't even connect it until now, your description. So one of my favorite things to do is in an ocean that has, like let's say 3 to 6 foot waves, so significant waves. I just allow myself to be pounded in the surf. Like I'll just lay
Hmm.
head down and just let the waves roll me and toss me. So this is it's one of my favorite things to do in the ocean. I used to do it for hours at a time. And just take my head up to breathe every once in a while, of course, but I love being tossed and turned and just buffeted. And
Yep.
the way when waves hit, the sonic feeling of
Yep.
being smacked by them is so wonderful. I don't know, it's a form of therapy, it's a form of massage. Yeah,
Yes, I love it.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right. So the one sort of critique that you had of the party that was kind of like not necessarily negative, but was like, this is different than what I normally like, and I can appreciate it, but this is my favorite, was about the crowd not really being made the star of the show at any point, and that's the thing that you love about Despacio,
yeah.
right? And so maybe now is a good time to switch over and talk a little bit about Despacio. I certainly
Yeah.
have, well, I've never been, but now my interest is certainly piqued, even though probably that's not my most normally favorite type of music. Like I said, like if I know there's like going to be an interesting experience, I'm willing to go, and I usually end up appreciating it. I feel like while I have experienced that the audience is a star kind of thing in techno at times, it's something I generally have experienced more with house music, which I've gone through major phases of my music life where I've been more interested in house music, or where that was kind of all that was happening where I was. So I went to a lot of those parties. So I think that's a little bit more of a feature, that communal aspect. Whereas with techno, there's a little bit more of like a sort of like either loner vibe, or like a vibe where like my reality is interfacing with your reality. And that's interesting, but it isn't necessarily like the celebration of our togetherness kind of thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about for some reason, when I listen to you talk about or read about, you talk about Despacio. When I first moved to New York in the early 2000s, there was a club called Cielo that was
Mm,
like circular dance floor. And I remember going to see, I was there like maybe the end of their run, and I went there and saw like Josh Wink play like a 6 or 7 hour set in that
nice.
circular round, and it had that very similar feeling to like what you're talking about. So tell us about
Yeah.
Despacio. It's the source, it's been the greatest source of your inspiration, but
Yeah.
also I think like set you up nicely to be able to appreciate something of the same quality but totally different.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's so many kind of thoughtful and intentional pieces to Despacio. That it's taken me a while to kind of arrive at a framework that allows me to explain it. But essentially, you've got seven stacks arranged in a circle, and they all point in. In the center of the floor is a disco ball. And
Gotta have
so
this.
the sonic energy is all central, right?
Mhm.
So, and the lighting and the speaker stacks, the stacks are lit up theatrically so that, occasionally they come into focus, occasionally they disappear, but the lighting is 360 as well. So there's really no focal point in the room. So people face every which direction. So that's different from a wall of sound where you can tell which direction the sound is coming from. So you naturally orient yourself because our ears are stereo. We want to kind of hear things in the way. Uh, so you so with a circular arrangement or even a 4 point system that you find in a lot of the best clubs, you kind of it sounds good from any direction. So what
Mhm.
that results in, what happens is people tend to accidentally face each other more often than not. You're not dancing shoulder to shoulder, seeing the back of someone's head. You're more often encountering their face. So there's just much more humanity present. And, also the types of music that are played. So Despacio is Balearic, named after the Ibiza, the Spain islands where parties happen. Uh, Too many DJs and James Murphy said, we want to create the perfect Ibiza party. We're going to like it used to be in the 80s, right? We're going to, DJ Alfredo was their big inspiration. He recently died. Uh, so they, and Balearic music is basically whatever serves the dance floor. It's really eclectic. So, it's all eras of dance music. It's all genres of dance music. You might take something that's like Belgian new beat and slow it down to 120 BPM or 115 BPM, which changes it and turns it into a soulful, kind of really groovy dance number. So at any rate, really eclectic music, speakers arranged in a circle, all the energy of the room is in the center. The DJs are hidden deliberately because they don't want to be the focal point. And in fact, in many of the Spacios, they have a sign up that says, maybe don't take photos, maybe don't take pictures, maybe just be here just for today, right? Like that's the sign. That's the only thing you can really see in the booth is that sign. As a result, and then every once in a while, it actually usually takes about an hour and a half into the set before the disco ball is lit up for the first time. And when it's lit up, it is unlike any disco ball you've ever seen light up. It is spectacular. They've got, 70 moving heads, go off all at once on the ball, and it just explodes in a supernova. And it usually catches people by surprise. And it's a very
I'd
climactic
go
moment.
just for that.
Just for that, just for that. But what kind of happens in those moments is suddenly the room that had been dark, and it's kept really dark most of the time so that people can be, feel safe to express themselves and dance, like nobody's watching because it's really hard to see anybody else. But what happens in those moments is it's like playing peekaboo with a toddler. Suddenly everyone's faces get uncovered by the light,
Yep.
and you can now see people and you see their joy. And so suddenly everybody's smiling at everybody else. For the course of a few key moments in the first song where the disco ball goes off, and that brings the crowd together. And then after the darkness descends on everybody again, suddenly you're dancing with somebody different because you
Yes.
had a moment, you made eye contact. You're like, can you believe what we're experiencing? And then now you're with a different group of friends, or now your friend group has been enlarged by stragglers. It's just, and that kind of mixing is happening throughout the night, the mixing of people and groups. So, and of course, if you want to be solo, you can be on the outskirts. You don't have to associate. You can have your glasses on and do a totally internal journey, which I've done there as well. been in Despacio, I think, some 70 hours at this point. So, there are a variety of experiences available, but I think that is incredible. And then, of course, you being into the sound system quality, this is a John Klett design sound system. It's Macintosh audio. They've got about 50,000 watts of Macintosh powered uh, uh, speakers, and then another 50,000 watts on top of that. So it's like 100,000 watt sound system. It's incredibly expensive, and you would never design this commercially because it's not sustainable. But this is just a passion project from these three DJs. Uh, it's very rare. It happens once or twice a year. It started in 2013, and on average, it's happened 1.5 times a year since 2013. So when it happens, I will fly anywhere for it because it is so special. They'll typically play a weekend, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I am in there from beginning to end. I do not even leave the room for a
I love it.
water break. I time my fluid intake so I don't have to leave to go to the restroom. But I also don't get, dehydration cramps. It's actually really hard to do because I'm dancing really hard and getting super sweaty. It is absolutely my favorite dance floor. And you mentioned the scorecard earlier. I created a scorecard to kind of think about the different elements that go into what makes it great. So I'm going to just look at my laptop real quick to make sure I'm getting it right. So my acronym is D party, as in dance party, right? So first is D, the DJ and the artistry. How did they select? How do they mix? Too many DJs are absolutely, unquestionably great technical mixers, and then their record collections are like, oh yeah, there you go, nice. Their record collections are massive. Probably 90,000 vinyls. A lot of what they play at Despacio is one of one vinyl pressings that they are creating just for play on that sound system because of the high dynamic range. Normal vinyl might not sound so good. So it's just impeccable. So it's easily a 10 on that front. The people so what happens at Despacio, it's often at festivals. And so festival crowds can be a little iffy. They come and go, they're splitting sets, they're always like, they've got FOMO, they're not sure if they should be here right now. So Despacio is best when it's just a standalone event. So the one that they had in March of last year in Belgium, the hometown of Too Many DJs, was especially great because there was nothing else going on. Everybody was there just for that. So the people will vary, or the score that I would give it varies based on where it's being set up. So in this case, Wall of Sound, I think, really excelled here because people were going specifically for this event. They had nothing else going on that night. They wanted to be there. Acoustics, I've already talked about. Despacio just sounds so incredible. It's about the same loudness. So I've got a crowdsourced database where I use people's Apple Watch and Apple Health measures of sound. So it'll warn you when, kind of sound is too high. The whole point is to preserve your hearing, but also it actually takes a really good sample-based measurement that you can look at hour by hour. What was your exposure level? And so DVS1, Wall of Sound, and Despacio are essentially the same exact sound level, 99 to 100 decibels. Average across the entire hour. So it's not louder, but you could definitely get more mids and highs at Despacio. So it's a much more kind of differentiated spectrum. And then I get into rules and governance. So this is really like, how is the event run? How do they sustain this party, et cetera? Like Despacio actually is unsustainable. The DJs make no money from it. That's why it's so rare. So essentially it's just whenever a festival says we want to lose a bunch of money by booking this incredible experience, that's when it tends to happen. Or as in the case of Belgium, the Flemish government says we're going to, do this because it's a cultural icon. So theatricals, this is where I think, again, as we talked about, Strobert was incredible. A very foggy, smoky room, actually inadequately ventilated. A lot of people smoking inside, but that just made the lights spectacular. Despacio has to rely on, people smoke inside as well, but there's a lot of fog pumped in. But the way the speakers are lit up, it's just like a Greek chorus. It's super dramatic. And then the highs and lows from total darkness to exploding supernova of a disco ball. The highs at Despacio are higher than almost anywhere else because of the way these lighting sequences are so deeply tied to the music moments. It's a lot of it is pre-programmed rather than, kind of a lighting director just kind of reacting to what the DJs are doing. So they have the time to work this stuff out ahead of time. And then in terms of intentionality and infrastructure and all that stuff. So, I mean, I love a sprung wooden floor. You've probably had the experience of dancing on a floor like that. It is just a joy. You can go for hours and hours. That's what Stereo Montreal has. Despacio is typically a concrete floor, like the warehouse that we were just in for DVS1. Concrete is a lot harder to dance on. It's a lot more punishing. So it's a lot more bare bones in some way. They put all of their money into the music and the lights, but at the same time, there's so much intentionality of design. I think and this is where, as you mentioned, my criticism or my one criticism of DVS1 Wall of Sound was what happened is the in DVS1 and the sound system are co-headliners. And so people face the speakers, and then towards the end of the night, they face the DJ. And so there's really no room for people to face each other. And so that's what I really love about the Despacio format is that it causes people to come together. And that's not always the thing you want. Sometimes you just want a more introspective, kind of solo journey. But I think that's a special kind of magic when you can bring people together in that way.
Yeah, so I just switched as you were rounding out to the scorecard that you did. This is the first
Yeah.
time I've ever seen anything like this in almost 30 years of going to parties at this point, right? This is the first time I've ever seen anything like this. And I like what I like is that it didn't feel like you spent your whole party thinking about this, so you weren't enjoying the experience. It was like the scorecard helped you sort of filter it after the fact into a format, as opposed to like you went there with the template and you had to experience the party according to your rules, right?
Yeah.
So this actually worked, and just the way, you've obviously been thinking about this for a long time. So like these ideas are in your head well enough that it's not controlling your experience. Like when you're learning something new, sometimes like you're not able to relax and enjoy the event in the way that you normally would, right? But it seems
Yeah.
like you were able to sort of filter this into this. And like, I feel like this was a very fair critique of the party, right? Like for me personally, it was probably more of a like a 9.5, 9.75, right, kind of thing, because of just where I was at that night and the way it unwound for me. But if I were to explain to someone why they should go, like it doesn't matter what happens for me, why someone else should go. Like this is like, I think this is a good assessment of the experience overall, without feeling, sometimes when you get into rating systems, like you lose the magic, or you lose the texture and feel. And I don't think you did. I think you did a really good job at arranging it into this format so that someone can say, yes, I next time I see that the Wall of Sound is going to be anywhere I can get to, I'm going to go, or I'm going to go. Or
Yeah.
not, because the parts that you gave good scores to aren't things that matter to you, and the part that you gave a lower score to, that's the thing that matters, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really liked that. I also, when I found you, you had the one article up on your Substack, and now you have the explanation of the scorecard system, as well as the 10 essential Despacio tracks according to you. And on there, I found some tracks that like are appealing to me, obviously, like, that I'm familiar with, or that are appealing to me. But also the way you described why they're important to you remind me of moments I've had with music, particularly music that has vocals, which isn't super common in techno. But so when it does happen, it's usually very memorable. And then also in my, reality of tech house and house, the way we think about some of those things is really interesting. And I loved your story about your mom, and about sort of I would love to sometime talk about the spirits that show up on the dance floor. And I've been in buildings where like I'm seeing things out of the corners of my eyes while I'm dancing, and then I go home and I look up the history of the building, and I'm sure that I was seeing something that happened there, like that is stored at a frequency band that music tapped into. I would love to chat with you about some of those kinds of things sometime. But any list that includes Justify My Love and anything by DJ Falcon or Thomas Bangalter, right? Like I can enjoy, I can appreciate that. So now you have me very curious about about Despacio. So good job on all of that. As we're winding up, I want to respect your sort of time here. Just give people an idea of what you're doing with your Substack and a little bit about if you're still, I don't know if you're maintaining your other website or not, sort of what the project is going forward and where they can find you and all that. And I recommend everybody go read the article on DVS1. I'll link to everything in the description.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, the project initially started out as a book about Despacio because I was just like so
You're in
overwhelmed
love.
with
You're in
the
love.
quality of the experience. But then, Despacio is so rare, most people are not going to get to it. And the number of people who have experienced it is so small that ultimately I felt like it would not have the impact I wanted it to have. And ultimately, the impact I hope for is that people who are designing dance floors, who organize them, who promote them, they'll read this and they'll think with greater intentionality about how they go about putting these things together. Because I think dance is awesome. It's healing, it's good for us. And I just want better experiences to be more prevalent, and more accessible to everybody. So it morphed into from a book about Despacio to a book about dance floors in general, which is now Magical Dance Floors as my working title. And I'm going to probably tack on a volume one because there are so many I need to get to and that I've discovered as a result of doing research into this. So I'm going to Berghain next month, for
I've never
example, and
been. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that one's going to end up on the list. I mean, it's on many people's, magical list.
Yep.
I went to Spain in the fall of last year for my birthday to also check out some of Ibiza's, so-called best clubs. And it turns out that the one that bills itself as the best club in the world is actually one of the worst experiences I've ever had.
Yep.
But at any rate, it's now a project about magical dance floors. I'm going to go into depth on a few specific dance floors, including Wall of Sound, uh, and Despacio, but also some others. And then it's going to be something that I finish drafting this year. That's my deadline for it. And then I'm going to seek a publisher and get it published myself or through a publisher in next year. So that's the goal. It's such a fun project. I have so much fun dancing, and it just gives my mind something to kind of put its energy into in the spaces between magic dance experiences.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to link up to both your website and your Substack site so people can go and check out what you have there. And I really enjoyed chatting with you. You are welcome here anytime or every time you have an experience that you would like to unpack or talk about. And I thank you for your time, and I encourage everyone to go check it out. Stick around for a minute. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. This is something a little different than we normally do. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.